The angel comes to the shepherds. Very familiar story. I believe we've all heard that story at one point or another. Some of the key parts of that story is that the shepherds were the nobodies. Throughout history, the Christmas story has glorified the shepherds, but in truth, the shepherds were the lowest of the low. It was the job that no one wanted, certainly the job that no one wanted their children to have. The shepherds were kind of like their own breed of people in a way, outcasts. And yet, the angel brought the message of good news and great joy for all people to the shepherds. That right there, if you take nothing else away, take that. The shepherds. Not the religious leaders, not any leaders. Not the people that pay their taxes, not the people that are pious and pray and do all the things they're supposed to do. No, the angel went to the shepherds, the people that no one else wanted to talk to, the people that everyone was afraid of, the people that they thought would steal your stuff and all that. The angel brought the good news of great joy for all people to the shepherds. I don't know about you, but I think I felt more like a shepherd than anything else most of my life. Sometimes, we might move in and out of whatever the in crowd might be for a period of time, but it's fleeting, isn't it? It's not always going to be that way. This too shall pass. And that's actually what I keep saying in this time right now that we're living through, which isn't so easy. This too shall pass. It's not always going to be this way. And that's why we talk about joy. There's joy and there's happiness. And both are pretty awesome. Let's be real. I want both. I want to be joyful and happy. It's not too much to ask. But there is a real difference between joy and happiness. We often assume that joy, we get it confused with that fleeting feeling of maybe happiness, giddy laughter, and contentment. That stuff that comes from the comforts of life. Sometimes we think that's joy. But that's not the kind of joy we're talking about today. Joy that we're talking about is the stuff that sustains our souls in those seasons of heartache, injustice, and sorrow. Joy is what we have that helps us endure the valleys of life that would be nearly impossible to bear without the life-giving fuel of joy, that joy that we get from Jesus. So if you go into the Bible, if you go into the dictionary, the definition of happiness is a state of well-being and contentment, a pleasurable or satisfying experience. Joy is defined as an emotion evoked by well-being, success, or good fortune, or by the prospect of possessing what one desires, the expression or the exhibition of such emotion. But the biblical meaning of joy is different. It's not a fleeting feeling in response to our current circumstances. It's more like an inner constitution, an inner foundation. Probably one of the best biblical personifications of joy is in the story of Job. In the biblical story of Job, he was stripped of everything that gave him joy in life, anything that made him happy in life, anything of everything, of any value to him. He was stripped of all of it in that biblical story. And through it all, he never lost his faith in God. Now, he argued with God a lot, and boy, was he in pain. but he never lost his faith in God. The difference in that biblical definition of joy is the source, of course. Worldly possessions and accomplishments, even the people in our lives, are blessings that make us very happy. But that fuel for joyfulness, of course, is Jesus. And that's the difference. When our lives are falling apart, when nothing seems to be going right, we can still find that little bit of sense of joy. We don't feel like we need to give up. We can turn it over to God. Joy isn't fleeting. It doesn't exit when the well runs dry, if you will, of our world-given circumstances. Joy doesn't leave us when we lose our job, when we lose our full health, when we lose a loved one. Loss is really hard. I don't want to minimize that. Nor do I want to minimize the realities of chemical imbalances, of which many of us struggle with. As I stand before you today and talk about joy, by no way or means do I intend to minimize the true realities of depression and other challenges with our mental health that rob us of joy and happiness. That's real. But yet joy exists. It allows us the perspective to be grateful and happy and to survive those trying times, those times when depression might be overtaking us such that we can't even lift our heads off the pillow and get out of bed. Joy feeds us in those times by reminding us of whose we are, that we're cared for no matter what, even when we can't get our heads off the pillow. Doesn't that sound nice? Wouldn't you like that? To be able to have a sense of joy even when the world seems so dark. It's hard. I know in my own periods of great sadness and loss, only through God's grace was I able to find a sense of joy. And for me, it came about through gratitude. And when my world was falling apart after my mom died, I'd go through my list, if you will, of the blessings in my life. And everything seemed all cloudy and dark and gray. I found joy in seeing God's light brought about by people who were serving, by people who thought beyond themselves to think of another. If you want to find joy, move beyond yourself. If you don't know where to go and what to do, serve another. I know that when I'm failing, when I'm struggling, when I'm having a really hard time, service is what pulls me out. Anyone else with me on that? I'm looking out on a congregation of people who serve. Need I remind you of the amazing things we do in this community, that we do for one another? We serve. We don't serve because it's a nice thing to do, although it is a nice thing to do. We serve because our faith calls us to do that. And in doing so, there's real joy. When I can think beyond myself and my own circumstances and look to another and listen to their stories and sit with them in their grief and their pain, or maybe their excitement and their joy, whatever it might be, is where I feel closest to God, where I find the greatest joy. What gets in our way of joy? On your slips of paper today, I'm asking you to tell us how you find joy. And now everyone's going to cross out what you just wrote and put in service, right? There's no right or wrong answer, guys, on that, just so you know. But what gets in our way of joy? Fear. Anyone with me on that? When you live in fear, man, it can be hard to be joyful. Fear of loss of one sort or another, isn't that it? Whatever the loss might be, loss of a loved one, loss of a job, loss of security, loss of friends, loss of health, loss of ability, loss. We're afraid of that because it hurts. Interestingly enough, as I mentioned, my mom's passing, which was 6 years ago, I got a call from someone this week, and her dad is in hospice care. He's moving towards his last days. And I'll be visiting with him tomorrow, I believe. And when my mom passed away, the one thing I still have a really hard time doing is going by her house in Northampton. I don't want to. It hurts. It still hurts. So as I was talking to this dear person, and she was telling me about her dad, and she told me he lives in Northampton. And I said, really, where in Northampton? He lives in my mom's old neighborhood. Really, God? Really, God? I'm going to be okay. Because I know God will be with me. But that won't be the easiest thing. I can't deny. And yet, it's not about me. It's about Him, the man I'm going to see. It's about that family. I will find joy in serving them, even as I go to that place of great pain for me. Doesn't mean that it makes it easy. It's like, when you're going to put your finger on the stove, you know it's going to hurt. But I'm going to live through that. So fear gets in our way of joy, does it not? It does. What are you afraid of? How about resentment? Another thing that gets in our way of joy. I could probably preach every single day for several days about forgiveness, I imagine. And if I were to ask you by a show of hands, who's still holding some resentment somewhere, and I won't ask you by a show of hands because no one will want to put your hand up, and then you're going to be feeling guilty about lying. So I don't want to do that to you. Because everyone has some resentments, right? But they get in our way of joy. Those resentments that we hold on to, what's the point? Resentment, unforgiveness, it robs us. It robs us of great joy. So today, we're called to push past that, to take an accounting. I could tell you ways to find joy, but the basic thing for each one of us is to figure out what gets in our way and move it out of the way. I'm here to help you, to talk to you, to work with you. If there's something getting in your way of joy, come and talk to me about it. That's your choice, because that's what joy is. It's a choice. Just like I spoke about last week, worry is a choice. That's the good news about worry. We don't have to do it. We can choose to do it, which means you can choose not to do it. Joy also is a choice. What can help you find joy? May it be so for you. Amen.